Chapter 48. Pick a Side. The moon was full, but the cloud cover was thick and threatened rain, throwing the camp into near-pitch darkness. Ryan couldn't sleep again. He was perched on the porch of the cabin. The slightly rotten wooden boards creaked under his weight as he leaned back against one of the support beams holding up the scrappy awning. His head had been buzzing all day with thoughts and plans of what they were about to go up against. They had already started planning the details, gathering the necessary equipment, recruiting the right people, discussing how they could pull it off, if they could pull it off. He took a deep breath of the cool night air, filled with the resinous scent of pine and a far-off note of petrichor blowing in from wherever it had already started raining. Funny how memories could attach themselves to something as simple as a smell. It's about to rain. I can smell it. Ryan put down his binoculars and blinked a few times, not wanting to rub his eyes and further mess up his already smudged red and black paint, glancing up at the dark overhead sky. Figures, Ray mumbled, still staring down the scope of his bright pink sniper rifle. It always rains on day 2. They had been staked out atop an apartment building in Rockford Hills, waiting for their target, an FIB informant Caleb had discovered through his community connections and tipped them off about. It was the second day they'd spent waiting on the roof for said informant to show her face. It was their job to take her out. It was Ryan's first job back in the field with Ray after their original encounter with Shadles. It had been playing on their minds since Jeff had given them the order to go out together. They were accustomed to working in silence, but this wasn't the familiar, comfortable silence they were used to. After another long and awkward pause in conversation, with no sign of their target, Ray finally mustered the courage and broached the subject head-on. Still staring down the scope of his rifle, as if using it as a cover, he asked point-blank, "How come you stuck around?" He gave no context, but he didn't need to. Ryan knew immediately what he meant. "I'm not one to hold a grudge." Ryan shrugged. "Besides, where else was I supposed to go?" It wasn't the most reassuring answer, Ryan had realized in retrospect, and it came out with brutal honesty. If it hurt Ray to hear, he covered it with his usual brand of sarcastic humor. "You had a job before this, right?" "Surely. Nah, let me guess. You were born with the mask. You've been killing since before you could talk. Can't fool me, vagabond." "You got me." Ryan held up his hands in mock surrender and chuckled. "IT, actually. I was a tech guy. I dabbled in a bunch of other stuff too, but mostly security systems, which, in a long and roundabout way, is sort of how I ended up here." "Oh, fuck. There goes the mystery." Ray spared him a glance and flashed him a smile. "Of course you were a nerd." Ryan shrugged. "Turns out, this pays better." "Still not helping, Haywood." "Go figure." Ray turned his attention back to the view through his scope. "But still, you stayed." With a slight nod, Ryan sighed and absently rubbed his shoulder where his clavicle had broken and subsequently healed. After another long silence, he asked, "Why do you do it?" "I don't know, man. I'm good at it." Ray shrugged, seeming even more apathetic than usual. "I just do it." Ray paused, let out a breath, held it, and fired a single shot. "Got her. You're on cleanup duty." Completely detached, no emotion, just a second of recognition of the target in his sights, a quick calculation, and a squeeze of the trigger was all it took. A chill ran down Ryan's spine. He wondered if it had been the same for Ray when it had been him in the crosshairs. Ryan cringed at the memory, realizing what he had mistaken at the time for apathy was actually guilt wearing Ray out from the inside. The same way it had done to him. It was Ray's way of coping. For a moment, he wondered if maybe there was a chance he could have won Ray back, the way Jeremy had done with him. If he'd been more open with him, if he'd pushed a little harder, maybe, just maybe. He blocked out the idea. No use dwelling. What had happened, happened. Too late to unfuck that one. Ray was gone, and not just gone, dead. With perfect timing, the rain began to fall lightly around him. The awning of the cabin offered only the barest of shelter, but he didn't mind. He sighed and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees and his forehead in his hands, raking fingers through his hair. Why do you do it? I don't know. I'm good at it. That was his answer, not yours. Maybe it was true once, but not anymore. Why do you do it? Does it matter? Yes. You're about to start a goddamn revolution. You better have a fucking good reason. To his surprise, a memory of Jeremy's voice answered him. All I want is to be someone who means something to this crew. Shit happens. We get hurt, we pick each other up, and we keep fighting. I know you want to keep fighting. Ryan's hand went to the hilt of his knife, kept constantly at his hip, feeling the smooth curve of the handle settle neatly into his palm, reminded of the inscription, He conquers who conquers himself. So why do you do it? I want to keep fighting. I want to win. And it's fun. The dark yet familiar tone of the vagabond reminded him. That too. He couldn't deny he never felt quite as alive as when he was with the crew, tearing through the city with the guys, a trail of destruction and howling sirens in their wake, the rush of adrenaline and the smell of gunpowder and gasoline fresh in the air. Even if the heist was a failure, even if there was no payoff, when they were together, there was no better feeling. And that's why you came back. For them. For us. Good answer. The footsteps behind him were muffled by the sound of the rain, but he felt the board shift and creak beneath him and looked up with a start. Jeff leaned against the beam behind him, still dressed in the khakis and t-shirt he'd been wearing that day. Hey, Ryan. Ryan nodded back at him. Jeff. Can't sleep? He dragged his palms over his face. What's sleep? Fucked if I know, Ryan said with a smirk. Jeff grinned back as he sat down carefully on the steps next to Ryan. Heard you and Gav are nearly finished with the video. Nervous? Nervous? Jeff repeated with a quiet scoff. Not really. Shitting myself would be a more apt descriptor. Ryan nodded. That's fair. Do you have a plan? I'm working on it, Jeff confessed. I have some ideas that might help. Good. We're going to need all the help we can get for this. They sat and stared into the raining darkness for a few minutes, soaking in the relative peace, before Ryan spoke up with something he'd been weighing in his mind for longer than he cared to admit. What about when this is all over? Ryan asked. What's the plan then? Jeff hesitated, eyes glazing over ever so slightly before blinking back to reality. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, I guess. If we come to it, Ryan's mind filled in grimly. Think you'll ever retire? Ryan asked Ray as he unpacked his cleanup supplies. Bioremediation, it was called. For their more discreet jobs, he could eliminate all traces of them and their target from the scene. No one would believe them if they confessed to it, but sometimes the fake AH crew needed to be subtle and untraceable. Sometimes they didn't want anyone to know they were involved, especially in matters the FIB might want to go sticking their noses in. Ray had scoffed. Please, I'm not that old. Besides, what the fuck do we retire to? Playing video games? I mean, if that's the case, sign me the fuck up. He laughed quietly to himself. But really, there's nowhere to go after this, right? This is it for us. Fakes for life. Even at the time, Ray hadn't sounded sure. But the words were right, and hearing them aloud, they'd fixed themselves in Ryan's mind almost as dogma. Of course that was it for them. It's not a life you can walk away from. It was like that line from that Batman film. You either die a hero, or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Well, what about the villains? Realistically, there was only one way this was going to end. They all knew it, as much as none of them would acknowledge it. It was only a matter of time. Fakes for life. We all die in the end. Why not have a bit of fun with it? I intend to deserve it. The vagabond's dark edge was back. For some reason, despite not feeling entirely like his own, that thought was comforting to Ryan. But there was another thought that was far less comforting, a thought he couldn't keep dismissing any longer. Jeff. Ryan started after a long pause, immediately biting his tongue and reconsidering. Jeff raised an eyebrow, but waited for him to go on. Ryan swallowed. We can't let them take any of us alive. His breath caught in his throat and he bit his lip, taking a steadying breath. I'm asking now. If it comes to it, I'd rather die than let them get their hands on any of us again. You understand? The desperation in his eyes was enough to make Jeff avert his own, still completely unused to seeing Ryan this vulnerable, even with all he'd been through. Jeff nodded. We go on our own terms. They take no prisoners. Promise me. Jeff looked back up, Ryan's blue eyes staring, pleading, into his own, and this time he didn't look away. I promise, Ryan. Thank you. If we do this, there's no going back, Jack reminded them. It was the last day they had planned on spending in hiding at the altruist camp. Realistically, they were surprised they'd been able to go this long. Jeff, Jack, Michael, Gavin, Jeremy, and Ryan had gathered in the main room of the cabin to review the digital Molotov cocktail they were about to hurl at the heart of Los Santos. Jeff nodded. And we gotta go all in. If anyone wants to back out now, speak up. Ryan looked around at the others, each as determined yet scared as he was. It looked like a heist, but this time it didn't feel like one. His heart was racing. It shouldn't have been. He was sure of his decision, but Jack was right. There was no going back once this was out there. It was all or nothing, the high-stakes game. It had only taken them a day to throw the video together. Sometimes a day is all it takes. Empires have fallen in less. Mika and the support team had embedded all their supporting documents in the video as links, overt and subtle, encrypted and blatantly open for all to see. They'd hidden them in different sites, left breadcrumbs for those eager enough to follow. They needed everyone to see. If the FIB wanted to cut all ties to their involvement, they'd have to tear down a significant chunk of the internet to do it. It left them wide open on the digital front, but if everything went to plan, it wouldn't matter. And if everything went to shit, well, then it wouldn't matter either. It looks good to me, Michael asserted. I'm in, Jeremy said with a determined nod. 100%. Me too, Gavin agreed. Ryan? Jack prompted. Ryan nodded solemnly. And we're all in agreement with the last part, Jeff asked them, eyes flicking to each of them in turn. It's important. We all have to be clear on that. I mean fucking crystal. Yes, Jeff, we get it. And yes, Michael nearly yelled at him. Gavin added more quietly. Wouldn't have it any other way. Jack and Ryan both nodded. They'd already made their positions well known. Jeremy looked almost offended when Jeff turned troubled eyes toward him. Of course, like you even need to ask. Jeff let out an audible breath. I know I'm making a big deal out of this, but that's because it is a big fucking deal. What we're about to do has never been done before. Jack nodded. The family's definitely a game changer in all this. The others nodded, but Jeff shook his head. This isn't about the family. This is about our family. He sounded dangerously close to emotional. What we have here is something I never had as a kid. Something better than family. Because we all chose to be here. And as much as I hate to say it, we may not get out of this one okay. And I need all of you to understand that going into it. Jeff? To everyone's surprise, it was Michael to speak up first. This may come as a shock to you, but that's how it's always been. Every day we're here, we're risking something, be it our lives or our freedom. Okay, usually our lives. But every time we go out there as a fake AH crew, he shrugged. Well, I mean, we know what we're in for. Jeff snorted. Well, now, I feel like a bit of an asshole, really. Why is that, Jeff? Jeremy asked. Remember when I said, the only way to leave the fake AH crew was in a body bag? He grinned, looking at his hands before back up at the rest of them and chuckling to himself. Jack laughed. Honestly, that's the only way you were ever going to get rid of me. Michael and Gavin both nodded. Yeah, me too, Michael added. Pretty much. Same, Jeremy agreed. Ryan had been quiet, and one by one, the others turned to him. What are you all looking at me for? I could have left you fuckers months ago, and I'm still here. Jeff burst out laughing, setting off the others. So, I think that answers your questions at any rate. Ryan cocked an eyebrow as he motioned to the screen. Are we gonna do this? He was met by a chorus of voices. Fuck yeah! Hell yeah! Do it! Yes! Seems so, Jeff said with a grin. Alright, let's do it. The cursor hovered over the link for a few seconds, as if doubtful of the validity of the content. The video was simply titled, Pick a Side. The fake AH crew had pulled stunts like this before. More often than not, they turned out to be relatively harmless shenanigans, the only real victims being the members of the crew themselves, and their reputation as a serious force to be reckoned with. With everything that had been going on lately, this felt different. He clicked the link and turned up the volume. A war is coming. Jack's voice overlaid sweeping shots of Los Santos that Gavin had gathered from his own personal footage, and some of it was nothing short of stunning. This is addressed to all those who associate with the randoms. Whether you've been recruited, are trying to get a foot in the door, or signed up for a worthy cause. Whether or not you believe the lies they've been feeding you, because they have been feeding you lies. Take a good look at where your orders are coming from, because chances are you're not the heroes you think. There was a carefully assembled montage of still images, security footage, news reports, and their own edited footage, set to dramatic music. Ryan had rolled his eyes at such a cliché when they had first pitched the idea, but even he had to admit it was effective. Embedded in the video were links to supporting documents. Give the people enough information to make up their own minds. Sure, they'd be blocked or taken down, but not before they were picked up and circulated. They'd get to where they needed to go. It was the one thing the internet was really good at. Even now, the video was spreading like wildfire. Take a look at your martyrs and see the resemblance they bear to the devil you don't yet know. Gavin had spliced news footage of the identification of Shadow's body with everything they could gather about the twins and their sadistic uncle, making very clear their connections with the FIB and the LSPD and all their shady dealings. Turns out we have a common enemy. You've been played, but you can have your revenge if you join us. This is your chance to pick a side. Our side. We don't care who you are, and we don't care what you've done, because frankly, we've probably done a hell of a lot worse. And more importantly, we are not alone. The other crews forming the family had sent their own footage to add in their own unique brand of destruction, chaos, and carnage. We may not stand for good, but we will not stand for being used or manipulated, and neither should you. Whether or not you like it, Los Santos is going to war, and when we win, you're gonna want to hope you're on our side, because we will not be so forgiving to those who weren't. The aftermath footage was brutal, more from their own archived footage, some fresher. The smoldering ruins of the warehouse, charred and broken and bullet-riddled bodies. A ruthless reminder that they weren't the good guys, that they would never pretend to be something they were not, that they weren't anything like those they were taking a stand against. And for the randoms who continue to stand with the LSPD, the FIB, Noose, whatever guise you're all fighting under, whoever's order you're following, know this. This war will take no prisoners. The final image was a screen burn of the crew's logo. Shit. He clicked a few of the embedded links, eyes scanning quickly over the data contained within the files. Shit. He picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. It rang for a good while before they picked up without saying a word. Bernie, we've got a problem.